Hey everybody, so I'm back with another discussion video for this week while I work on the next big one. And for this week's discussion, I kind of wanted to talk about something. This is sort of semi-topical, but also just a little bit more generalized. And it was also suggested to me by my buddy Rhett, so big thanks to him for suggesting this because I had no clue whatsoever what I was going to make this video on. But the subject is broken game launches. It's something that it's almost hard to find things to talk about now because it's so commonplace. We've more or less just kind of grown accustomed to it. But the biggest thing that sort of I'm using to spring into this is I haven't played it yet, but my friend Rhett, he recently got s.t.a.l.k.e.r 2, and he's really enjoyed it. However, as anybody who has played s.t.a.l.k.e.r 2 knows, and really as anybody who's ever played any s.t.a.l.k.e.r game ever knows, s.t.a.l.k.e.r 2's got a lot of bugs in it, which we were all expecting s.t.a.l.k.e.r 2 to have some kinks in it, you know. But there was a lot of stuff in the game though that wasn't working. The biggest one being the A-life system was just not functioning at all for some people. And in my friend Rhett's case, it was often spawning enemies and NPCs literally right next to him in the world and really screwing him up. And it really hampered a lot of people's enjoyment of that game. And it has sort of, I think, ignited within a lot of people the topic of, again, like I said, broken game releases. Now, with s.t.a.l.k.e.r 2, everybody's kind of given that game a bit of a free pass on the bugginess front, mostly because, again, it's s.t.a.l.k.e.r. Bugs are sort of a feature of the series at this point. It's the premier Slav jank title. We all kind of expected, and I think a lot of people sort of hoped that it would have some jank to it. And also, plus the circumstances the game was made under, meaning the war, it was expected that it might not launch in the best state. But I kind of want to use, while this topic is on everyone's minds because of s.t.a.l.k.e.r 2, to talk and shed some more light on why exactly we are in this situation of so many games coming out, and why we've been in this situation for about 15 years now of so many games coming out that are buggy or broken or just blatantly unfinished. Because there's actually a lot going on there. A lot of people, they immediately jump to the easy explanations of lazy devs or greedy corpos, and in a roundabout way, that's not always untrue. Sometimes you do get devs that just don't really give a fuck, or they get burnt out, or they lose passion for the project, and just put out something that ends up not being good. And a lot of times you get greedy producers and corporate guys and publishers that are like, just fucking shit the thing out. Which leads into what I'm going to talk about, which is there is a term within the development industry and the behind the scenes that a lot of people don't really know about. And I feel like more people should know about this term, and that is minimum viable product. Now, basically what minimum viable product means is as video games as an industry got bigger and bigger and attracted more investors and people coming in who are looking at it not from the perspective of how do we make a good game or a game people enjoy, but how do we make something that makes the maximum amount of money possible. You bought a stake in this company, or you bought this company. Now, how do you make the maximum amount of money possible while spending the minimum amount of money possible? And the way you make a game without spending a lot of money, budget for games actually goes to salaries and paying people. So you typically, the goal is how do we get the game done as fast as possible? And what that means is there needs to be a point when the game comes out no matter what. But at the same time, you obviously can't launch a game that is just completely blatantly unfinished. So that gave rise to what is called minimum viable product, which essentially what that means is the worst state of game that gamers will reasonably be expected to still buy. Now, similar to the concept of the Overton window in politics, the minimum viable product, what you can reasonably expect gamers to buy, flaws and all, has shifted considerably over the past decade. Whereas it used to be that coming out with a game missing nearly all of the core features that were advertised and it being a barely functional mess, that used to be something that you could pretty much guarantee was going to be a financial failure. If a game came out and it just straight up was not what was advertised, or it developed a bad word of mouth reputation of being a buggy, broken piece of shit, you could expect generally that it was not going to do well once it hit shelves. Well, that all changed in the 2010s as hype cycles became a much more integral part of video games, and you got kind of what is similar to the concept of an event movie. You got kind of like an event game. So that all became a much bigger part of gaming culture, and it sort of started to override the typical question that people would ask of, is this game good? And I would say that I think probably the breaking point when companies really started to catch on and be like, hey, maybe we can really put out a game that just is not as extensive as we promised, or as extensive and stable as people expected, but they will still buy it. I think the big turning point for that was the first Destiny game, because that game came out with more or less almost nothing that it was advertised as having actually ended up in the final product. And up until the game was released, they were still advertising it as having features and levels and characters and enemies that had been removed from the game years prior. It was pretty bad and egregious. And not only that, but I even remember when I bought Destiny, it came with 2 little flyers advertising the first 2 DLCs, and that was kind of my red pill moment for video games. But not only that, there was just not a lot of content in the game, period. I mean, everybody remembers who played it that you could beat the entire story in a day and clear all of the side content in probably another 2 or 3 days. And that was the whole game. And it sold really well, and it made a lot of money. And I think that was sort of when game companies started to realize they could get away with not doing a whole lot. And it was the subsequent success of other games, well, not subsequent, actually a little bit before, but Battlefield 4 was an enormous mess when that game came out, and was still sold very well. And from there, you got a ton of games within a couple year span that were coming out that just did not have the level of content or polish that gamers sort of expected. Assassin's Creed Unity is another great example. It was Unity, the French one. That was another good example. That game came out in an almost unplayable state, but still sold really well, and didn't actually really... It was more the sales of Syndicate that it affected, if I'm recalling correctly. But either way, all of that. Watch Dogs, another great example of a game that came out that people didn't really care for, and it was significantly different from what was advertised. The Division is another example, and all these games were financial successes because really what they were largely built off of was the hype of the new generation of consoles, the 8th generation. And that really allowed developers, I think, to realize we can get away with really nickel and diming people of like their money with games that aren't super finished or polished or well thought out. So that was, I think, the first big thing. The other big change that happened in the 2010s that sort of gave rise to this phenomenon is patches. And the idea that, okay, well, we can come out with a minimally, is that a word? A minimally, it is now, viable product, or a product with minimum viability, whatever, you know what I mean. We can come out with an MVP, a minimum viable product, and if people are really that pissed about it, we can just patch it later. And we've seen this with nothing as a greater example than Cyberpunk 2077, a game that launched in a notoriously unfinished and barely functional state that has since risen to critical acclaim and a lot of people really liking it because they patched the shit out of it. And this example also extends to multiplayer games, the aforementioned Battlefield 4, also Destiny, Destiny 2, a ton of single-player games. I mean, hell, I remember when Diablo 4 came out, people who were unsatisfied with that, which, full disclosure, I thought Diablo 4 was fine. I didn't hate it like a lot of people did, but it still is an example here. I saw people saying, well, if you don't like it, just wait. Because Diablo 3 was really bad at first too, and then they patched it and it became really good. And this has sort of led to a mentality among developers that, okay, well, we come out with the smallest amount of actual game that we can get away with putting out, and then we make the rest of the game later. The entire live service model is built off of this very idea. Siege is another great example of this, actually. A game that came out, no one liked it, everybody was shitting on it. Here we are 9 years later, and people really like it, and it has a huge community because of, well, the patches they made to it. Even Counter-Strike Global Offensive was a great example of this. It's just, it's led to a sort of mentality that I don't think is healthy in the long run, because it used to be launch was like your one chance. If the game came out and it Gabe Newell in the Half-Life documentary had a great line where he says something along the lines of delay is just a couple more months, suck is forever. And of course, we all know the Miyamoto quote that's been memed to high heaven, the delayed game is eventually good, a bad game is bad forever, that kind of thing. And that's sort of the thing is that mentality is viewed by a lot of people in the industry now as obsolete. Now we grind out a game over a couple of years, get it to like the most minimally functional and feature complete state that we can release it, and then we spend the next couple of years fixing bugs and glitches and adding content that we originally advertised. And yeah, I think this has led to a not so great trend in the industry. However, like all trends in the industry, they come and go. They're always in flux, and nothing is really permanent with regards to most things in the world, but really especially with regards to the ever-changing whims of the market and consumers. So for this last little part of the video, I want to talk about what I think is the outlook of the industry. Ubisoft recently said in response to their delay of Assassin's Creed Shadows that the standards of gamers for the final product are rising. And basically, in a not-so-polite way, saying people are less receptive of spending $60 on a game that plays like shit and ain't got shit in it. Now, in reality, what this really corresponds to isn't necessarily that people's standards are getting higher, and more so that they're returning to what they used to be, which is that it used to be when you spent $60 on a game, you expected that game to work and have all of the shit in it that was on the back of the box or in the trailers, if you really were like that much of a gamer and paid attention to those. It did not become the idea of it being acceptable to spend $60 on an IOU didn't crop up until the mid-2010s with the release of Destiny. And I think that a lot of developers and especially publishers got way too comfortable with this idea of the minimum viable product, and they sort of lost respect for the audience as a whole. It's sort of a truism in most other industries that if you make shit, people are gonna stop buying it eventually. The video game industry largely ignored this, and was able to ignore it because of the hype culture within video games, which tends to not really exist. And people don't really get super hyped for the newest John Deere tractor. People don't really get hyped for like, oh my god, did you hear that S.t.a.l.k.e.r coming out with a new handsaw? Like, no. Brand loyalty mostly only stays around in a lot of other industries if the brand still makes shit that is good. With video games, though, there's that communal aspect to it that can become so... With video games, though, there's that communal aspect to it that can become so intoxicating and alluring and enchanting to people, where they see a game on a store shelf and they might not initially be interested in it, but if they notice that it's got a midnight release or a launch party and they see a bunch of other people are excited for it, they might be like, hey, well, maybe there's something to this. Like, this might be kind of fun then. I mean, if a bunch of other people are really enjoying it and liking it, maybe I'll enjoy it and like it too. And that was a huge thing. And then again, for some people, it was just the communal aspect of it as well. Like, oh, I want to be part of this group of people who are excited about this thing, There's a lot that goes into it that does not exist for other industries. And I think that that spell has started to wear off, and gamers are starting to go back to their older ways of being more like, not necessarily immune to the hype and the communal aspect of it, but more cautious, and I think eager to sniff out bullshit or what they think is bullshit. And also, just in general, negativity and cynicism is quickly becoming also kind of negative counterpart to the hype cycles, where now whenever people are excited about something, you have a ton of people who are jumping up and down, excited at the prospect of telling them that whatever they're excited about will probably be shit. And all of this, I think, has really contributed to a growing level of suspicion on the part of the audiences who are like, okay, this looks cool, and what you're showing looks cool, and the box and the art looks cool, but is the game good? People have been burned enough over the course of the past 10 years to sort of have a degree of skepticism when it comes to a lot of new releases, and we've seen that even some perennial franchises that were universally loved are not immune to this. Fallout 76 and Battlefield 2042 are two great examples of this phenomenon of being two series that seemed largely immune to putting out low quality or just totally garbage and unplayable releases, and then put out totally unplayable and low quality garbage releases. And yeah, I think companies are starting to pick up on the fact that, okay, we got to go back to the old days where we sort of we pick up the ball and start coming out with games that are in a functional state on day one and have all the shit in them that we said they were going to have in them on day one. And we can't just rely on patches and DLC anymore and the good graces of players to put up with that anymore. And then there's another rant I could get into on this, a whole rant about how this ties in with what I said a few videos ago about budgets and team sizes, but that'd just be me repeating myself at that point, and I don't really want to do that. But I'm just gonna say, leave it on a note of optimism. I think that the tides are turning, and we're gonna start seeing more stable releases and releases that are more feature complete again in the next few years, especially because I think as the game industry shrinks, which I do think there is not a crash, I don't think there's a crash coming, but I think there is most definitely a shrinkage coming, and as that happens, I think there's going to be a return to a commitment of having a much more narrowed focus on quality control and tight features and feature completeness in video games, as opposed to the kind of one-size-fits-all, throw everything we can think of in there and make sure it mostly works sometimes, and then put it on a disc and call it a day. I think we're going to start slowly but surely moving away from that in the coming years. But let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you agree with my kind of optimistic outlook, or do you think we're going to see another 10 years of developers making dog shit? If you made it this far in the video, say Cyberpunk 2077 was perfect day one, worked on my machine, you're an idiot. Say something like that. But yeah. Other than that, but yeah, like I said, comment down below, let me know what you think, and on that note, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, all that standard YouTube outro stuff that we all say at the end of every video, because that's what we do. We are shills for ourselves. And I also want to give an extra special thank you to everyone who watched the video to this point, and especially a thank you to the patrons over on Patreon: Spec Teams 1 Slingshots, Zorio, the Gazer Patron, Lev, and Blue Yutsu, as well as the members here on YouTube, Saiga and Brigador24. Really appreciate y'all. Really appreciate everyone. That's all I got for this video. I will see y'all in the next video, and goodbye.